Thank you so much for tuning in to She's All Over the Place with Kiriaki. That's me.
Thank you for joining me. I am so happy to have FRED GREENHALGH on today. He's a US-based audio pioneer, and he's best known for bringing location recording techniques from his indie film background to the production of immersive audio movies. He's head of audio production at Realm, overseeing their original scripted fiction programming, 20 plus shows a year. Whoa, that's a lot. And production services. And his newest project, Harley Quinn, Sound Mind for Spotify. Also, I had the pleasure of working with FRED on Undertow Blood Forest. We're going to get into it right now with FRED. Thanks for joining me. How are you, FRED?
Hey, thank you. I am doing great. I am so happy to be here. What a treat.
Yeah, seriously. Thank you so much for making the time. Audio storytelling, acting for audio, and how it differs from other formats. Let's jump right into that. So, well, first of all, before we jump into any of that, where are you from and how did you end up in Maine?
Oh my goodness. Okay, yes. I'm a tried and true Mainer. I'll share this funny story. So my family goes back in Maine for a long time. My grandfather's generation, he left Maine. He was in World War II, got off the farm, post-World War II, got a GI Bill, lived on Long Island, was an executive, worked in Manhattan. My mom, child of the 60s, like, I want to go back to the land, and came back to Maine, did a whole back to land thing on our family farm in Maine. And so I'm of that generation of like, it's amazing how like in my grandfather's generation was like, get off the farm. And then she's like, go back to the farm. And I kind of get to feel like I'm in both these worlds where what I do today, I literally live off the grid with my goats and my solar panels, but I get to work. Realm is actually based in Manhattan, crazily within 2 blocks of where my grandfather's office was. And I get to be in both worlds. And so there was a time just 50, 60 years ago where you had to make a really binary choice of, do I live in an urban environment or do I live in a rural environment and how do I pursue an artistic career? And now you get to have it all. I have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's so cool. And, we worked on Undertow Blood Forest, which takes place in Maine. And when we were having sessions together, it was pretty on par. There was only one thing where there was like one altercation, but otherwise the technology was pretty seamless. And the one thing that did happen, it was just kind of with Angelo, it was just like a haha, we kind of like laughed about it. And it was just a great way to have a bathroom break or like have some water. But yeah, it's pretty efficient with the technology.
Yeah, every now and again, gremlins crawl into the internet pipelines and eat the little gophers that move the digital particles around. But other than that, we're good. The internet is such a game changer in terms of like access to everything. And like people go around and look at the internet and they see there's definitely negative attributes to, culture and social media, but you also see people who are able to learn things and learn from things and collaborate with people that never would have been possible before this technology. So, I'm just a generally positive, optimistic person. So I say, let's look at, it's a tool, like all tools have positive and negative. So let's go use these tools to our advantage and do cool things.
Yeah. And so when did you start utilizing these tools and become an audio producer and an engineer? How did you segue into this field?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it took me a bit to find my path. In college, I knew since I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. I wrote stories since I was young. I didn't really realize how much audio had impacted my life. Like I lived at our family farmhouse was definitely haunted. So things like the creaking stairs and windows that blew with cold winter wind through the night, all that stuff like printed on me, but I didn't quite realize how much I could use it artistically until many years later. So my path in college took me to New Orleans, where I studied film. And I probably would have stayed there longer, but Hurricane Katrina had other ideas. So I kind of came home to Maine and decided to finish my degree at my original school, USM, the University of Southern Maine. As I was sort of readjusting to Maine and having left New Orleans, which at the time had a ton of film happening, and I had like discovered the sound department sort of by accident down there. They had a thing where as a student intern, you could just like go to a film set, and I ended up with the sound department and like run around the French Quarter with a boom pole. And I was like, this is fun. So I'm back in Maine. I'm in my 20s. I'm trying to figure out how to make stuff. There really isn't much of a real film industry in Maine, so to speak. And one of my college buddies like, have you ever heard of these old time radio dramas? And I'm like, an old time what? And he gave me tapes, which I could like, how old school is that? But I got these tapes of old time radio dramas and like The Flash, The Shadow Knows. And I was like, this is good stuff. Like, what is this? Like, it totally blew my mind. It was like going through your whole life not knowing that movies existed. And then one day there's movies. And so that was like a light bulb moment. And from that moment on, I took like short stories I had written. Took an oral interpretation school through the theater department, and my dorm was based with where all the theater nerds were. So I would put posters up that said, come act and I'll feed you mac and cheese. And boy, did actors show up
Wow.
for their free pasta in college. And so the first shows I got were on the campus radio station, and just bringing people in on a Friday night and, acting. And then I started figuring out how to put sound effects like through the board at the radio station. And then the one thing led to another. I met this guy in Ireland. His name's Roger Gregg. He said, well, dude, you told me you were working on film projects. Have you ever thought about making one of these radio plays like you would a film? I'm like, oh, boom, another light bulb went off. And that's when I started bringing actors physically out on location and taking them literally out into the woods or out to a beach. Or if a scene took place in a car, we'd have the actors in a car and open the door and come out. And I'd follow them around with a microphone, that sort of thing. And obviously, by the time our paths crossed on Blood Forest, there's this thing called COVID that made it so you couldn't do it the way that I was doing it back in those days. But that's all still part of my DNA, this idea that trying to make it sound real and not sort of, too much like a cartoon, but like these are real people living real stories, and that's what we're trying to capture in audio.
Yeah, and this is kind of off the cusp, but I remember a while ago, someone showed me this thing on Google or an app. If you want sounds under a bridge, and they're free, but people have actually gone and did audio of rain or kids playing, and you can royalty free, or you pay a fee or something app or website, and you can actually download those sounds if you can't actually go on location to do it. So did you experience doing any of those things? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, well, there's lots of different layers to it, because there are, if you just are someone who's I need some peace right now, I want to listen to a river, there's all sorts of ambient, just sort of peace type sounds, or just or if you want urban sounds, all that's out there. And yeah, people who get nerdy about sound effects can collect them and sell them, and they get used by sound designers in a variety of fields. I was always interested in collecting my own as much as possible. And I think that's where alluding to earlier about my childhood and growing up in a creaky house.
Yeah.
Learning to use your ears creatively is its own muscle. And my first radio play was set in New Orleans. And it occurred to me, this is the moment where I really realized how much I love this medium, was that I could conjure the French Quarter. So as a writer, prose writer, I wasn't great at a paragraph of how would you create this French Quarter and flowery text and all the setup you'd need. But in audio, you have a little clip clop of some horses. You have a little trumpet in the background, burp, 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 and then maybe the sound of a beer bottle rolling on the sidewalk with some voices in the background, and boom, we're there. And that's no set, no prose, just 4 sound effects. So I just was obsessed with capturing my own whenever possible, because I was very particular. I realized I could see these pictures in my mind. And so I definitely use, sound effects other people have recorded. There's, I'm, if I've got a helicopter, I don't fly helicopters around too much, explosions, that sort of thing. But when possible, I'm very particular about what kind of ambiences. And as an example, in Blood Forest, that happened a lot, where my sound designer has learned if he puts a bird that doesn't live in Maine in one of my shows, I'm going to blow a gasket, because it's to me, that's something that we're 1 out of a million listeners maybe really would know, that this type of bird doesn't live in New England. But for me, this is all it. This is your production design. This is your costume. This is everything in audio play. So And like little details can add a lot. Like, oh, let's have a little bit of a barred owl call here, or add some crickets or spring peepers here. Because spring peepers, the person who's listening to it will not on a conscious level understand. But what we're saying is it's a time of year. We're saying it's a certain location. All that goes into the thought process. So
yeah. Speaking of thought process, I thought it before and I didn't say it, but since we circled back around, it reminded me of like my Granny Dale's house when I was a kid. And yeah, how you hear certain sounds and things, and how then those intricate details, you don't know at the time when you're a kid or when things are happening, but you can shapeshift that and you can put it into the power and have it be advantageous for your craft as an artist or in life. One, for it to not have power and scare you, you could take that thing that creeped you out and be like, oh, that's sensorially like kind of creep me out. That's kind of a weird thing, and it's audio and I'm sensitive to it. I can lift and pivot and shift and put that into the work and have that finite detail of it, and that's your craft and your gift. So someone tuning in and listening or watching, they could apply that same principle to whatever it is that they had when they were growing up. Something they don't know, it's a skill set, like you were aware of it, but someone who's not could take something like that and say, hey, like what's in my arsenal, or what's in my toolbox, where they too could pivot and shift. And instead of it being like a weird thing that happened when I grew up, it could actually be something that they could align with their craft or something that they're doing for the near future. That's kind of really cool.
Yeah, I think like the skill of listening is just really wonderful. And, we're a culture that has so much visual information all the time that it's nice to sort of like, close your eyes and can you see with your mind's eye. And if there are sounds that scare you, can you like recapture them and have power over them again? That's certainly for me. There's, all the scary things I'm writing they're all scratching at something.
Yeah. So let's pivot into, Maine, Undertow, Blood Forest took place in Maine, but there's different elements to what you're doing with the Blood Forest. So how did that come about? And like explain Undertow and then Blood Forest.
Sure. So, growing up in Maine, especially the part of Maine I'm from, like central Maine, Bangor, Old Town Orono area, is like Stephen King country. And like, this may sound silly, but he's almost like a patron saint. Like he's just sort of like such a hometown hero. In fact, I'm like old enough that like I went trick-or-treating at his house back when he still was able to do that and not have it be totally bonkers. And so I always looked up to him. I definitely I was a latchkey kid around third grade. My mom worked nights. There was a bookkeeper who had all the typical of the time, late 90s bookshop full of Stephen King paperback novels. And he thought it was the funniest thing to get 10-ish-year-old kid reading Stephen King books. So I remember Cujo, and a book was so terrifying, but I like couldn't put it down. And so it's sort of like, you just get hooked. I don't know. You just get hooked on that feeling. And so part of it for me is like, how do I create? It's a strange feeling because like not everybody likes being scared. And I totally get it if like horror is not for you. But for me, it's like, how can I create for someone else the power this book had over me to scare the living daylights out of me, yet I could not put it down. And so that's sort of that part of the story. So, you see that kind of taste in a lot of the things I do, at least in the horror space. And Undertow generally is a weekly podcast. It's hosted by me. It's scary-ish stories, varying degrees of scary. And so Undertow was the second season of it. Now we moved on to a different project called Dark Tome. Blood Forest, I wanted to do a werewolf thing for a lot of years. I thought werewolves were really interesting in audio. And I had an idea that originally was like a 90-minute screenplay. And if I told you the premise, it would spoil the show, so I can't talk about it. But it was basically like a twist on a werewolf show of like, it's a werewolf show, but X. And that worked for like a 90-minute horror movie concept, but you can't sustain that for like a 10-episode series. So to make Blood Forest, we had to take sort of the core idea and turn it into, and just build out the town. And so the character that you played and all her friends all became this much bigger story that is as much about the community, and it has werewolves in it, but like you could take out the werewolves and a lot of the story would still work because it's really about, it's just a lot of like kind of normal working class people in a town where there are things that are nice about it, things that are not nice about it, trying to figure out how to survive with werewolves in the mix. That's the kind of horror I liked. I think that is the one thing I really got from Stephen King was the sense of relatable characters in crazy situations.
Yeah, and it was released around Halloween, so the werewolves. It was really in alignment, apropos of, the vibes. I love how it was released once a week. I really like that. Now, you can binge and hear all of them, which is, I like that too. But I loved how it came out around Halloween. I mean, the ladies who cast it, legendary.
Yeah.
Casting directors, females in Hollywood. They cast TV shows and films. So, I mean, that's really cool how like you have these network TV shows and then these films that are on screen, and how big and massive these audio dramas and just these audio scripted. It's like you said, you close your eyes and what can you imagine? And instead of visually seeing a TV screen, you're literally just closing your eyes. I love just putting the lights down and then just using, because the mind, it fills up the rest. You don't have to feed and tell the audience. They'll fill in the space. Yeah. They'll fill in the XYZ dots. You want to, as a director, maybe talk about that aspect of it for you?
Yeah, well, there's definitely an aspect of the old sort of creative adage of like less is more. And yeah, letting, like what you just said was really nice, letting the mind fill in the dots. So, we find in like audio horror that you can't really have a jump scare because you can't really do that trick of like, boo, it doesn't really work in audio. And so what we do instead, at least the philosophy in Blood Forest, was to try and get some characters who the audience would care about and then put them through the ringer and put them in a universe where you knew was very dangerous. People could die, but you're not quite sure where the threat is. And so you basically, as a listener, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm so invested in all these people, but what is going to happen to them and what's going to hurt them and where's it going to come from? And so that's where the horror comes from. And a lot of the things are very real. There are actual werewolves in it. That's not much of a spoiler. You learn that pretty soon in the show. But there's also bad stuff that happens that is not werewolf related. And some of that stuff can be just as terrifying as the werewolves. And that's also kind of part of what my statement as a creator. But yeah, it's a lot of just making sure you have the discipline to say when is less more, when is more, and how to like peel back layers. Because there's another, not to keep going back to Stephen King, but he's a great quote on writing for audio in one of his on writing books that's like about how effective the old time radio plays were because you could never see the monster. And so the kind of philosophy is like, when you're watching like a horror movie, you're like, there's like this whole part of the movie where you're like, there's a monster, but they're always like just outside, just to the edge of the camera. You can't quite see it. And at some point you see the monster, and no matter how good the like special effects are, you're like, oh, okay, it's the monster. I can like wrap my head around it and mentally kind of put it in a box. But in audio, you never do that. So the monster, if whatever you're seeing in your mind, you can never like rationalize it away. So you're actually, you're doing something somewhat devilish as a director and like kind of using those like real like lizard brain survival instincts and manipulating them to have a horror experience. And
yeah, I mean, there's something called the lizard brain.
Yeah. There's
like different parts of the brain, and there's one called the lizard brain.
Yeah, no, that's what you're doing. You're trying to make someone think that a monster, a lion or a bear or something is trying to eat them.
Yeah. Yeah, we should have a neuroscientist on next time, like dissecting these elements for us.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of tricks you do. So I was trained in some of the like audio engineering. There's like various psychoacoustic effects that you play with. Like a sound sounds louder if there's quiet sounds before it. And there's things you do like that where you, if you know something big's gonna happen, you do a lot of effort to like slowly build it, and so that when you really get to that big like, rah, the monster jumps you. Yeah. You've built up tension by being disciplined up until that point. So there's a lot of psychology as well as a craft that goes into these things.
Yeah. And when you were in school, did they teach you that about sound and frequency and how we hear things, the decibels in the ears?
Yeah, I mean I didn't had trained for like audio drama or podcasting, like that just didn't exist as a thing back in the early 2000s. But I did, when I would go to like music engineering, that's something that people who make records know, because there was a fabulous podcast I listened to. I'll forget the name of it, but they were talking about like, why do you like feel a certain way in your heart of certain like chord changes or certain moments in music? And it was all about how, especially when music sort of goes to where you think it's going, and then it does something unexpected when you think a chord is going to resolve in a certain way, and when it sort of changes it, like that's the thing that starts making you like you get goosebumps or like something swells inside of you. So you do things like that of thinking about, what is like the psychology of the listening experience? Like, because this is all true. This is all stuff that scientists study, is like, how do sound patterns affect the brain, and how do you use, and people who make music know all about this. There's a reason that certain popular songs are so enduring, or to stand the test of time.
And then like same with like sound frequencies, people who are into like sound bowls, healing frequencies, attuning to certain levels. So I want to kind of pivot and shift into acting for audio. I have a lot of voiceover actors, just people who are really interested in acting overall, the process. So it's so interesting. How is acting for audio different than any other format? Let's dive into that.
Ooh, the big question. So on some level, it isn't. What I seek as a director is authenticity and trying to feel a moment. So it took me a long time to be able to really to understand that this is what I was going for. Because I think earlier on in careers, maybe not all directors, but certainly for me, you have something you hear in your head and you try to tell people what you want in your head and you try to get them to do that. And like, that's not a way to get it. And then what I realized, and having trained under really seasoned radio drama directors, that you need to have the performer find their own path to the moment that you want. And so it's, being able to communicate sort of like, what is the human truth of what's happening here in this show? And so if you can just have all the skills that an actor needs in any medium, of just sort of empathy, of like really understanding the material, having the sense of both like courage and vulnerability to like go there, that's the most important stuff. And I think for me as a director, casting is really important, making sure you have the right people, which is not, it is obviously all the skills, but there's also like a kind of like a vibe of person it's a little hard to articulate. But I'm like, if I do a good job creating the like parameters where people feel safe, they feel like they trust me, that they can like try stuff, and that it's a judgment-free area, because like you can tell when actors like hold back or like are acting. Like the best acting is like
in the scene.
You want them to, you just want it to feel like this is life, and that these people are these characters, and that you're experiencing a true human moment. Happens to be recorded by audio equipment. So then you kind of go into that part of it of like, okay, well, that's great, Fred, but like, how do you actually make it as a voice actor? On some level, it's a lot like film acting, in the sense that like you do want to kind of that more grounded, naturalistic performance. Theater acting can be a challenge, because if you're used to like projecting to like the 100th row, you have to really pull it back. And even people who do a lot of,
or if you're just a loud person.
So sure. And even compared to like a lot of how video games, I get the sense, and animations are done. Like sometimes you have producers who are like, okay, you're this character, give me like 5 versions of this line. Okay, now 5 versions of this line, 5 versions of that line. And that's not really what I'm doing. I want to have a conversation with you about what the character is, what the character's motivations are, put the actors, like when you worked with me, in a virtual room together to find the scene. And you have to, I think the film and TV actors, the challenge is they're used to all the stuff that you convey with your face and gestures and like little twitches you can't get away with. So you have to find, how do I like convey my voice, like a certain, like an uncertainty, or like all this like broodiness that I might do on camera. So it's tricky, because it's a lot of like finding interesting ways to deliver the lines and to own them and to be naturalistic, but also, I don't know, find ways to bring what's on the page to life in ways that surprise everybody, including yourself sometimes.
So I have a couple like nerdy, technical, small questions that I know from like an actor's perspective that are just like interesting, if I may. So sometimes now, no slating at the beginning of the name. Before, they're like, when you slate, it's like a handshake. Hi, I'm Katie Chonacas. Hi, I'm Katie Chonacas. Or it's like giving a handshake. Are you into, when you're about to hear a read and you're listening to voiceover actors, do you like or not like, or do you not prefer? Like, what's the vibe for you of hearing a slate?
Fascinating. I mean, I think hopefully the casting call tells you which way to go. What's helpful is knowing what kind of equipment you're running. So that's usually what is asked for when you see like a Realm casting call go out, because it's just sort of like often, it depends. There's shows where it's like you really kind of need to have a remote kit is what we're looking for. And other times we're like, if you have a remote kit, great, but we do have the option to bring someone in the studio. But knowing the factual information of do you have a recorder and what kind of recorder you have is useful. That's none of that is nearly as important as getting the read, and there are definitely times where there's performers who have like all the fancy gear and they're just not the right person for the character. And it's not like they're not amazingly talented. It's just there was something that someone who like recorded on their iPhone was like, oh, they did something that like me as the director, me as a writer, the person who was so close to the material didn't even think was in here. This other person found. So it's hard. I don't think there's like any right way to audition. To me, I have deep empathy for actors because it's hard. It's hard.
It truly is. Thank you. And I'm saying thank you for everyone, who empathizes with the acknowledgement of what you just said. Quick, funny story. One time I was in the Ralph's parking lot in Los Angeles, super hot, blazing hot, super hot, like blazing hot to the max. And I had a last minute quick audition and I took something in my trunk and put a coat over my head. I auditioned for the plosives not to go over the mic, for the P's to not plosive. I literally, for Arco, not only did I book the job from an iPhone in a rush, but they used that audio for the piece. I didn't have to then go into a studio or to my studio and re-record it. They just sent the check. So you just never know.
You just never know. No, it's so wild.
You just never know. And then, so I have another technical geeky question for the actor here, right? This is for the actor, because it's always like a thing that I hear about and that people blog about and stuff. So when they're auditioning, right? And me, when I'm auditioning, when we're auditioning for voiceovers, it's different when you're reading like on screen because the person line reads with you. But when you're doing the voiceovers, you hear it in your head, you're reading it, or you know the scene, you did the preparation where you're just going through the emotional experiencing, pause. Now, but each moment is its own moment. How much lull period do you like in between each thing? When you listen to it, do you listen to it from the actor's perspective, linear all the way through? Or do you like that little bit of a pause and a lull so you can then hear the other actor's line, one, verbally, two, in your own head, or just a little space so you as the director can feel that moment of what the actor just went through before chopping to the next? Or do you like them like tight, like one after another? Like,
yeah, no, I actually love it when someone reads against the scene partner, which I know obviously is more work and you have to find someone who's going to read with you, but like that tends to result in an audition that sounds sort of more authentic to how we sense you'll interpret the material when we're actually doing it. And if that's not possible, then I definitely would leave the spaces in there naturalistically, because it can feel very disjointed if it's like, here's a line, and here's a line, and here's a line, and here's a line, because that makes it harder to sort of like see, because there's definitely, it's like, it's so hard for both parties involved in this kind of process, because you're trying to like, the director is trying to see how the show will be, the actor's trying to do the same thing. And so having it play out where it feels like the pacing that feels correct to you, that even though it's just literally empty space perhaps, is telling us a little bit of a sense of your personal dramatic pacing.
So I think that's very, so I think it's important to leave some lull spaces there so it leaves that imagination, kind of like what we were sharing earlier of like when you're listening to audio, you close your eyes and we fill in the spaces. So for a voiceover actor, maybe to leave that space so then the director has that time to fill it up, because if you don't, you're just on to the next. So I didn't know if you're like listening and just listening all the way through to go on this journey, but I think actually leaving those like lulls in between are important, because I didn't know on the other side if the director's like, hurry up, twiddling their thumb.
If 200 people submit, I'm listening to all 200 to the end. I feel like you took you did it. You went through the effort. I should go through the effort. So there may be other directors and producers who do things differently, but I give you the respect of listening to the whole audition.
The whole audition, because there's many people that say they give your best because they listen to the first 3 to 7 seconds or like, something like that, and they don't get to the end.
It never hurts to hook someone in the first 10 seconds. I mean, we think about this a lot in podcasts is you can go once you've hooked someone, like a cold open is like everything. Because once you've hooked someone, the data shows knows this, like that if someone listens to like the first minute, like the likelihood they listen to the rest is up like 1,000%. So both things are true. Like you may, yeah, like for sure. I want to hear to the audition where I hear the first 10 seconds and I want to hear the next 10 seconds. I want to hear the next 10 seconds after that. That is also true.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're doing 20 plus audios per year at Realm.
Thereabouts. Yeah.
Now, how many people are on your team? Is it different every time? The same team? Like, what's the vibes?
Yeah. At present, we have a head count, 7 or so. There's me, a couple of the producers. We have a composer, music supervisor, sound designer, editor, production manager, and production coordinator. So we have like a whole department. And so we have people who kind of handle all the the SAG administration and the coming up with schedules and all the logistics that are involved. And then we have a complete post-production unit, building out the actual shows, as well as producers who do a whole range of things, including directing. And then we can build out other teams. I know always am connecting with other sound professionals on a range of skills, editors, sound designers, composers, other people who have Dolby mixers, etc. So it kind of depends on the show and the timeline. And we have an awesome team in-house at Realm, but the people that I like to work with have a combination of just really getting the art form, having a lot of passion around it, and just being nice people to work with. Because, when you're dealing in an industry that's fast-paced and intense, you want to be at the end of the day, be like, whew, that was crazy. Let's go hang out and talk about how crazy it was. You don't want to be like, oh my God, these people. That's just not the vibe.
Yeah. So do you work on one project at a time, or do you work on multiple projects at one time throughout the day? Because everything goes in a rotation. There's so many elements to it. How's your workflow?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of, irons in the fire at different levels of fire. When we did Blood Forest last year, I had just come off the set of Harley Quinn within 2 weeks, spinning around and going into production on Blood Forest. After Blood Forest, there's a totally different team doing a lot of the post-production on Harley Quinn. So I was obviously very close to that team, making sure things were going smoothly. But I was I was very hands-on because I had directed Blood Forest on going through all the takes, working with the sound designer, working with the composer. While at the same time, we're talking about, hey, 2023, what's going to be happening in 2023? So it's kind of there's just life cycles of projects. So yeah, and that's kind of the moment now where we had a little bit of time to kind of get our regroup, lay of the land. And there's a show that goes into production next week. There's a show that goes in production maybe 2-3 weeks after that, and with a bit of luck, kind of keeps on chugging.
Yeah, I personally, I've auditioned for podcasts, audio, but since Blood Forest, there's been many more that have popped up, many more, and from the same casting directors too, a couple of them. So I think it's really exciting and a lot of fun. And so you're doing what you're doing, and then when it's out, you're on to the next project. So while marketing and people are promoting it, your work's done and you're already on to the next project, right?
Yeah. It's true. It's true. And sometimes you're I wish podcasts had the big event. I will say I did get a promo of Blood Forest to run as a trailer at a horror film fest here in Maine in October, the opening week, and that felt really nice because you don't have that feeling if you work on a film and it's opening night and we all show up in nice clothes or
virtual clothes.
No, podcasts are zoom 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 zoom. Yeah.
We need to have virtual events then.
Yeah. No, I've done it a few times. I did that. I didn't do it on Blood Forest. I worked on a show, ElfQuest, which was wonderful fun, iconic 1970s, to this day, independently owned comic series, worked with the creators, really wonderful fan base. One of those comics that really is trying to define fantasy in a sort of non-Tolkien way. Wendy Peeney, one of the creators, is such a pioneering force in comics and just so loved and so ahead of her time. And we did listening parties for that because it was actually supported by Kickstarter backers. So early on in the days of how we were going to get this project off the ground, we said, well, why don't we go to the fans? The fans, if they love it, they'll show up, and they did. And what the way of thanking the fans as well as celebrating the work was to have these like private listening parties. And we had hundreds of people come in on Zoom. We'd like get on, talk about me and my other producer about kind of like what's going to experience now. We'd bring in some of the cast to have a little chat at the top, play the episode, do a little talk Q&A at the end, take questions from the audience. The audience had like a Discord where they could like comment in real time, and it was terrific fun. It felt like, oh, this is how you can turn a podcast into like a launch event. So
yeah,
that was a good experience for sure.
Very cool. So when you're doing 20, plus per year, I mean, that's a lot. So, but then you have the writing aspect and the directing aspect. Like, how is your process with that, with doing the audio as well? Because you're writing it, and then you're casting it, and then you're listening to the VO talent. Like, how do you rotate all that personally? And like, how do you work with teams to help you vet certain things out? Like, do you do the majority of what you can do, and then when you get to a certain point, then you extend it to your teammates, or even in your personal friendships for their opinions, like when you're doing independent projects of your own as a writer and director?
Yeah. So there's sort of two versions. There's like how Fred did things prior to Realm, and there's like the wonderful, awesome experience I could have now being part of a larger team. Blood Forest, I was able to like essentially act like a television showrunner. So I had the idea, I pitched it internally to Realm, like, hey, we should have another Halloween show, and luckily people agreed. And then I built out a writers team. They're all also based in Maine. We did a weekend workshop. Like I had a pretty good idea. I sort of had the premise. I knew the town of Langley. I knew maybe a couple of the characters, but in the course of a weekend, we had plotted out the whole thing. And then it was up to, we plotted out the whole thing. And then then it was like a crazy fast writing process. We had a team of 4, 2 writers wrote a whole first season. And then the second 2 writers rewrote, kind of polished it. And then I polished it. And then we had the recording script. And I stayed intimately involved throughout. Once we finished recording it, gave the whole project to an editor. The editor would send me back rough cuts. I would personally sit in Pro Tools and sort of finish editing it to where it was like just how I wanted it. And then it would go to a sound designer. Other projects, I'm much less involved. I'm not less involved, but I'm not quite so hands-on. And so I'm kind of more like assembling a team, making sure that team has what they need, offering, creative feedback or other types of feedback as needed to support them. And if you're the version of reality where you kind of want to get one of these off the ground yourself and you're saying, well, Fred, this sounds cool, but I'm not part of a company like Realm. What do I do? I have a free resource on my website, finalrune.com. That's Learn Audio Fiction with Fred. So one of the things I did when the pandemic first happened was like, I had actually been booked to go do a weekend workshop with my alma mater here in Maine. And of course that got canceled. And so I'm like, well, what if I just do this online? And I did. And then like 100 people signed up over the course of, it was like a 5-week course. And it was fun. All the students kind of became mini companies or mini groups, and they all made actual works in this 5 weeks. And so you go there now on the website, you can sit through the course, you can see what the students came up with. And it's, you can do this any number of ways. You can do this kind of on your own. I think it's more fun with friends. But the process, what I always say is just go make something, because there's a lot of people, I probably talk to a dozen aspiring podcasters a week, and there's such a sense of I have to be validated by this somebody before I can start. And for me, I'm I never was that. That's kind of why early in my career, when I sort of grasped how hard it would be to break through to publishing, I'm I'm just going to start a podcast, because no one can keep me from, people cannot publish my book, but no one can not let me put out a podcast. And so that's still the mentality, 15 years later. And to me, frankly, I don't think anyone at Realm cares where I went to school or anything like that. But all the work I had done on my own, hanging up the posters around campus, making it, figuring out how to make sounds work, doing all that for a long period of time is what was that was my resume. It's you have, not only you have all these skills, but you also have that hustle to make something on your own. And so whenever I meet someone like that, anyone, literally anyone who has made a podcast, you have my respect, because even the simplest podcast is hard.
Yo, Right here, we're in the top 1.5% out of almost 4 million podcasts. So thank you. I receive this. And because of the person tuning in, listening, and watching, it's because of you that I thrive, I show up, and that we're like pretty close to the moon right now. We're like pretty close to the moon. So there's a whole strategy. There's so many elements. Hi. Hey, beautiful. Oh, thank you. We got a gift on the show. All right. Love that. Speaking of gifts, we're giving gifts away every single episode. Definitely go to the show notes, put it in the topic Fred, something that you learned, something entertaining, anything you want at all. We're giving giveaways, it's evergreen. So no matter if you hear this from a year from now, you can still enter the giveaway. The link is in the show notes below, and you could win something, a surprise. So you never know what you could win, but we're giving giveaways every single episode, which is really exciting. Speaking of Fred, where can everyone contact you? I'll have it in the show notes, but what are some ways people can reach out to you and follow you?
Yeah, so Final Rune, FINALRUNE. So that's my Twitter, Instagram, my website, personal website, finalrune.com. That's where you'll find the course of learning audio fiction. If you want to follow what I'm up to with Realm, we're Realm, like Realm of Possibility, realm.fm. Or if you look on podcasts, check, lots of cool stuff we've made. Harley Quinn and the Joker on Spotify. I mean, I've done like 6 shows on Realm, but you can also check out Undertow. Just look for Undertow wherever you get podcasts, and you can hear this crazy show that you were in, Blood Force Season 2 of Undertow.
Alex Keys to the Truth.
Keys to the Truth.
I'll have it in the show notes. So since the Joker came up in Harley Quinn, my favorite, I love it all. The sound, the acoustics, the voices, everything is so good. But Marbles, oh my God, that episode is just like, it's so good. What's one of your favorite parts that you liked working on, or the sound, or like a moment or two that was really like, epic for you?
That was just a show where everybody brought their A game. For me, being able to be on set with Christina Ricci, like, come on, and everybody just was so great. And Eli Horowitz, the director, from Homecoming, one of the few fiction podcasts that really broke through the mainstream, got a television adaptation. And it's just, it was just brilliant working with him and seeing it's like you're just being on a professional sports team, and you're like, we're just playing baseball here, but we're playing our game. We're playing at such a level. It's like, it was just so much fun throughout. So that's it. It's just a sense of like, pinch myself. Is this happening? Do I get to do this? You get to a point where like, live it, enjoy it. All you got to do is like, be your best self and not think too hard about it all, and be grateful, because not everyone gets to play make-believe on a professional level, but it can be done.
Yeah, but not only the story so cool, the sound, the quality, the audio, like, kudos to you. I mean, we put it there. Thank you. A lot of thought went into it, of like, what does Arkham Asylum sound like, and how does it not sound like anything we've ever heard before, and what weird, dark, grinding sound. When I was out there in LA during the recordings, I would go out and just go check out LA. And there was definitely a moment where I was like somewhere out in Burbank, and there was this like, I can't believe I'm going to say this, like a dark alleyway. And there's like this sound like, and I'm like, Frederick, are you really going to like walk down a dark alleyway in Los Angeles right now to collect the sound? I'm like, I really hope this is not the beginning of a horror movie, but I did it. I recorded the sound. And it was a really good sound, and it's in the show. So that's my story. Which episode?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's in the asylum as part of the texture of the asylum.
Okay.
There's some good hospital sounds in that show.
No joke. When I listened to it, I couldn't believe it was over, and I was going to listen to it right then and there. And then all of a sudden I started looking up like everyone on the show and retweeting it and letting everyone do yourself a favor, listen to it right now. So like, I wanted to instantaneously like listen to it again. It's like, it's so therapeutic. It really takes you out of your quote unquote everyday world, or like turning on music or turning on a podcast episode. Or like even watching a movie. It's like this immersive experience in a whole new way that I've never experienced, and I've consumed a lot of content. So I'm like very bullish.
Yes, we did our job. I mean, that's how we want it to be, is like, we want it to be, the way I think of sound design is, it's like, if you notice the design, we tried too hard. We just want you to like get on the merry-go-round and go. And then you're like, wait, is the ride over? Yeah, let's go get back on.
It's exactly what happened. I'm like, is it over? And anyways, I'm going to keep listening to it. It's therapeutic. It's so therapeutic in the weirdest way.
Which is funny because Harley Quinzel is in fact a therapist in that show. I don't think that's a spoiler. We learned that in like the first scene. So
I love that. So good. Wow. Life really takes its course. I know you're super busy. I'm so grateful for you in so many ways. You're welcome back on the show anytime. Oh, honing it in. 1, 2, 3 things for an upcomer who maybe an audiobook, a YouTube, a podcast, a book for educational purposes. Cause 1998's different, 2000's different. In 2023, somewhere for educational purposes to pivot into learning the craft of your profession. 1 or 2 things maybe you could tell the listener.
Yeah. Not to keep pitching my course, but check it out, finalroom.com. It says learn audio fiction with Fred, and you will learn, I make no secrets of my tricks. If you are going to record your own stuff, of the entry level mics, I like the Rode NT USB. It's of the $200 or less mics. That's a good one. You should have a closet or something. We definitely hear performers who make a go of it in big cavernous rooms. And so I think, I often see a lot of newbies think they need the most expensive microphone you can buy. And it's far more important to have a good, quiet room. So work on your space first. And your space means both physically, is it acoustically protected? Is it reasonably quiet? But also are you your fullest self in that space? Add a piece of art or an incense or whatever makes you your most true human self. Because I don't know, there's parts of the business out there that are probably terrible, but I managed to be with positive, cool, nice people and have made a career of it. So I think you being your authentic self and presenting that way is what you need to be doing. And so your space should make you feel like that. It's a little bit going back to Virginia Woolf and a room of one's own. Just go. And I think you need to have it because especially in this whole pandemic era where we've kind of been trapped inside and not have all the access to the world, to kind of keep your sanity, you do need to have this is the part of my dwelling that's my creative space and is my little shrine to my however you define creativity, you need that. And I think if you have that and you have the courage to follow your heart and not and be able to separate your sense of worth from rejection, because that's I will tell you, if you don't book a gig, it has nothing to do with whether or not you're insanely talented. It has to do with 100,000 things which you have no control over, frankly. Yeah. And so I think it's just trying to be persistent and to say a rejection is just an opportunity to go again, and to say, the only mistake is to stop trying.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, my voiceover booth over there, I have an icon that my grandmother gave me, my 93-year-old best friend. It's just an icon, and it's sacred, and it's right above my head when I'm recording my voiceovers, and to personalize it, to make it sacred, I think it's really, really important. And here we're doing the podcast, so if anyone's on the video, I made it a studio podcast. It's different, so yeah.
No, it's great.
Yeah, it's different for everyone. Every moment, every situation is different. Just like us, our emotions are always changing. Mm-hmm. Things are always changing. Nothing's ever set in stone. This is the way it needs to be. You can pivot and shift. So thank you, Fred, for your moments and sharing and caring. And I really appreciate you. Everyone, if you haven't tuned into Undertow Blood Forest, please do. And I'll have it in the show notes so you can stream it and listen to our geniuses together.
This was a blast. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Kitty at Key, over and out.